Microsoft SharePoint is a very powerful document repository, and many organizations leverage this capability by implementing a review and approval process before publishing documents to a particular document library. The goal of this K2 application build guide is to walk you through the process of building a K2 application for document review and approval. Let's begin. In looking at the overall design of this application, we will think in terms of workflows, forms, reports, and data, since these are the main elements that make up a K2 application. We will be separating the review workflow from the approval workflow in this design, since it is not always necessary to submit documents for review before they are approved. Consequently, documents may need to go through several review cycles before they are submitted for approval and publishing. The review workflow will allow the requester to submit the document for review to one or more reviewers. Upon doing this, the system will update the document status to indicate that reviews are pending. A review document task will be delivered to all reviewers assigned to review the document by the requester, with two possible outcomes for this task. If all the reviewers accept the document, the system will set the document status to reviews accepted, email the originator to let them know that their document was accepted, and then end the workflow. Alternatively, our rework step comes into play as soon as any one of the reviewers indicates that the document is not accepted by actioning their task with rework required. The document will be routed back to the originator so that they can either cancel the document review outright or edit the document accordingly and send it back for review again. In each case, the system will update the document's properties to indicate the review status of the document in order to provide visual feedback to anyone looking at the document from the SharePoint list. Now let's consider the document approval workflow. This workflow can be submitted to one or more approvers at any given time, similarly to the review workflow. The system will update the document status to indicate that it is currently waiting for approval. If all approvers approve the document, the system will move the document to the Approved Documents library and email the originator to let them know that their document was approved. However, if any one of the approvers rejects the document status will be updated to reflect this, and the workflow will end. For our data capture capability, we will be using the K2 generated forms for user interaction, but keep in mind, the forms will not be used to start the workflow automatically. The user will be able to manually initiate the workflow anytime they like from the document context menu inside the document library. K2 Smart Forms will be used mainly so that we can customize the form layouts through the browser designer, since we cannot easily do this when using the default SharePoint forms. K2 workflow reports will be enabled so that users can report on any given workflow, and we will utilize this in an interesting way with the document approval workflow later on. For our data source, we will be using two separate document libraries. One called Documents to Review and Approve will act as the working area for documents as they are updated and follow the review and approval workflows. The second library, called Approved Documents, will be the landing site for documents once they are approved for release at the end of the approval workflow. Let's briefly discuss the steps we will take to build this application. In step 1, we will add the K2 app to a SharePoint site and then drop the worklist app part onto the landing page of the site. In step 2, we will set up the data sources for this application by creating two document libraries in the SharePoint site that will handle the working area for documents and the approval workflow landing area for documents once they are approved. Step 3 will take us through the tasks of creating the K2 application for the list with data, forms, workflow, and reports. We will work on the tasks involved with building out the document approval workflow and a document review workflow in steps 4 and 5 respectively. In step 6, we will throw all of these pieces together and test the application by running multiple documents through the review and approval process. Finally, in step 7, we will take a look at the capability we have to edit the generated smart forms and change the layout. The first thing that you need to do when building a K2 application is add the K2 app to your SharePoint site and then configure it. In step 1, we will perform this task as well as add the K2 worklist app part to the landing page of the site so that users can see their list of K2 tasks. Let's get down to it. When you want to create a K2 app with a SharePoint list or library, one of the first things you may need to do is add the K2 for SharePoint app to your site and optionally configure the app parts on one of your web part pages. This step may have already been performed on your site, so if that is the case, you can skip ahead to the next step. Keep in mind that if you have created a subsite and want to build K2 apps within it, you'll need to follow these steps to add the K2 for SharePoint app. In your SharePoint site, let's go into Add Lists, Libraries, and Other Apps to see what's available for this site. In this step, we want to add the K2 for SharePoint app to our site. So go ahead and select that option under the Apps You Can Add grouping. Now you should get a dialog box that pops up asking you to trust K2 for SharePoint. Since we know this is a trustworthy app, go ahead and click Trust It to begin the install. From here, you'll be directed back to your site contents page for this site. However, it may take a few seconds for the application to be completely added, so I'll pause the video and we'll come back once it completes. Okay, that's finished. We have one more step to complete before we can start building workflows, which is to configure the K2 for SharePoint app on this site. To get that moving, let's open the K2 for SharePoint application by clicking on it here. The first time you open this, it will take you through the registration wizard. On the first page, you'll need to confirm the SmartForms runtime URL is correct. For this demo, I can leave this set to the default URL and move on. However, keep in mind, your URL will be different if you're working inside your own environment. Just click on Next, and on the next window, K2 will take care of the configuration settings for you automatically. This will take a few seconds to complete, so I'll pause the video here. Okay, now that the configuration is complete, you ought to be able to validate that it worked by looking at all the green check marks next to each configuration section. It all looks pretty good here, so I'll go ahead and click Finish to move on to the next page. And that's pretty much it for the basic setup of K2 for SharePoint, so click on the name of your site to get back to the top. And also keep in mind that your site's name may be a bit different than mine as we work through this training together. So there will be a point where you're going to ask, how do my users open tasks that are assigned to them? Let's address that question now by adding the K2 Worklist app part to the landing page of our site. In order to do this, we'll edit the site landing page and then go to the Insert tab to find the App Part button from the ribbon menu. When you click on this, it will open up a list of app parts available to insert on the page. From here, select the K2 Worklist app part from the parts list, and then select the section of the page you want it to land on. In this case, all we get is rich content from the dropdown, so I'll leave it at that and click Add to get the worklist visible on the site. Then to save this change back to SharePoint, click the Save button either to the left of the ribbon menu or in the upper right just above the ribbon menu. And once that saves and opens the page back up in display mode, you'll notice we have the K2 Worklist app part ready to go on the page. That's the end of step 1, so let's take a moment to consider what we just did. Note that the K2 for SharePoint app has only been installed for the current site, so if you want to use it in other SharePoint sites, even subsites under this one, you'll need to repeat these same steps to enable the K2 for SharePoint app in those sites. We added the K2 Worklist app part to this site so that users can open their K2 tasks from within this particular site. Adding the Worklist app part is optional. Your K2 application will still work just fine even if you do not add the Worklist app part to this site. However, you may want to consider centralizing the work list on another site within your organization so that users have a common place they all go to open their tasks. For step 2, we need to set up our data source for this application, which in our case will be the 2 document libraries, one for the working area for documents and the other for approved documents. Let's begin with the working area document library, and we'll call it Documents to Review and Approve. Starting from the landing page of your SharePoint site, you can either open the Settings menu at the top of the page and select Add an App, or as I'll actually do here, select Add Lists, Libraries, and Other Apps from the center of the page. Then from the Your Apps page, select Document Library from the Noteworthy section. You can call it Documents to Review and Approve, and then go ahead and create it. Now that the library is created, let's add some columns to it by opening the Settings page from the List context menu that's located right here. In the Columns section, we're going to create 4 columns, the first of which will be of person or group, and we'll call it Reviewers. You can set the following settings as well. Make sure it's a required column, allow multiple selections to Yes, set it to People Only, choose from all users, and then also show field as name with presence. This column will be a collection of users who will ultimately review the document, which ends up being the column as well that the workflow will use to assign the review tasks. Now let's create another single line of text column called Review Status. The workflow is going to use this column to update the status of the review workflow as it progresses. So all the default settings for this column are good where they are. Now let's create another person or group column, and we'll go ahead and call it Approvers. And we'll also make it a required field. We'll allow multiple selections, allow people only, all users, or a specific group. You can pick which one you want depending on your needs. I'll select all users for now. And then show the field as a name with presence. And save that back to SharePoint when you're ready. The last field to create will be another status field for the approval workflow called Approval Status, and we'll set that as a single line of text. And we don't need to change anything here. We can leave all the defaults the same and save it back. Now with that all said and done, your columns for this library should look like mine here, right on the screen. For our next task, let's add the approval document library into the site by again selecting Add Lists, Libraries, and Other Apps from the site landing page. And then choose Document Library under the Noteworthy section, and name the library Approved Documents. Once your library is created, open up the library's context menu options by clicking on the ellipses here, and then select Settings. We want to add a column to the library of type single line of text, and name the column Approval History. A bit later on down the road, we will be configuring the approval workflow to insert a link to the Workflow View report inside this column. It will allow users to view more information about who submitted the document and who approved it. And at this point, that's the only column we're going to add to this library. So when you're done with setting up your own, your final layout of the Approved Documents library should look like my screen here. There are 2 main parts to this step. The first part is to expose the Approved Documents library as a smart object so that you can use that library in the document approval workflow for this application. The second part is to generate a new K2 application with data, forms, workflow, and reports for the Documents to be Reviewed and Approved library. Let's get started with Step 3 by opening up the Approved Documents library. Next, open up the K2 application option for the library by selecting the Library tab at the top of the page, and then select Application from the K2 group of menu options. You'll notice on the next page that the Data option is checked by default, which is what we want here. But make sure that the checkbox Allow this smart object to be used in workflows for this site and all of its subsites is checked and selected. This option is enabled because we want to use the Approved Documents library actually in the workflow that starts from the Documents to be Reviewed and Approved library later on. When you need to use specific lists and libraries in a K2 application that is tied to other lists and libraries, you will need to select the option to allow the smart object for this list or library to be used in other workflows. You can go ahead and click OK from here to generate the smart object. After a few seconds, you should be directed to the K2 Application Elements page for the Approved Documents library, and from there you should see that there is a smart object available for this library. Now, the next thing we will create is the K2 application around the Documents to Review and Approve library. To get this going, return to the landing page of your SharePoint site. Then browse to the Documents to Review and Approve library. Once that opens up, open the Library tab again at the top of the page, and then select Application from the K2 group of menu options. On the Create K2 Application screen that pops up next, the data settings to create the smart object should be enabled by default. So all you have to do is select to allow this smart object to be used in workflows for this list or library this time. Enable Smart Forms to be created, and put a check in the box to use K2 Smart Forms as the new edit and display forms for this list or library. This is going to replace the default SharePoint forms and will also allow you to edit and customize the user interface if you have the need in your own applications to do this. Also, select the workflow option since we're going to work on the document approval workflow in step 4 coming down the road. You can name the workflow Document Approval Workflow, and then since we want to start this workflow manually, select the option below, When the following events occur, and put a check in the box for Workflow is manually started. You can leave all the other boxes empty for now. We also want to enable the default K2 reporting features for this application, so put a check in the Create Reports checkbox. Then when you're ready, click OK to generate the K2 application. After a few seconds, you should be dropped into the Workflow Designer where we will begin step 4 to build out the approval workflow. Now, just to quickly recap, in this step, we exposed the approval document library as a smart object so that we can use it in our K2 application attached to the Documents to Review and Approve library. We then created the K2 application around the library called Documents to Review and Approve, and we selected the option to replace the standard SharePoint forms with K2 generated forms. We also created a new workflow that will be manually started by a requester, and we also included the standard K2 reports page for this. Now let's move on to step 4 and look at building out the document approval workflow. In step 4, we will continue to add steps to the document approval workflow. This step will combine adding server tasks to perform document property updates, as well as adding a task for human interaction where a user must make a decision to affect the direction of the workflow before it continues. Let's get started with walkthrough step 4.1, in which we will add a step to set the document's approval status. Assuming you are on the Workflow Design Canvas screen, we want to drop an Update Document Properties workflow step into the empty slot on the Design Canvas in order to update the status of the current document to pending approval. To do this, select the Documents group from the ribbon menu options at the top left, then drag and drop the Update Document Properties step down to the Design Canvas. On the first page of the Update Document Properties wizard, you have the ability to drill in and select the document that you want to update. K2 assumes by default that we want to update the document that is associated with the current workflow. In this example, the document reference is already selected for us in the radio button option, Use a document that is referenced in this workflow. So we don't have to make any changes to that, and we will also leave the options selected at the bottom of the window to continue if the document is checked out. On the Specify Values screen, set the value of the Approval Status column by entering in Pending Approval, then click Finish when you're done. Back on the Design Canvas, we want to rename the new workflow step by double-clicking on the current name to open it up for edit, and go ahead and call it Set Status Pending Approval. Now we want to add an outcome for this step so that we can add more workflow steps down the line. Hover your mouse pointer over the new step, and then click on the Outcomes icon that appears in the upper right corner as shown here on my screen. Click on it to open up the Outcomes screen, and then click the Add button, name the outcome Continue, and we only need one outcome for this step, so you can click OK now to move on. The next task we need to walk through in step 4.2 is adding the Approved Document User task to the document approval workflow. So from the ribbon menu at the top of the page, switch to the general category of ribbon menu options, and then drag and drop the user task for Smart Forms onto the blank step on your design canvas. And then we'll name this task Approved Document, then add the following instructions so that they appear on the task assignment form when the user opens up their task. Please review the attached document and indicate your approval decision. Next, add two outcomes down at the bottom, one approved and the other rejected. These will be the possible outcomes or decisions the user can make when they complete their task. Move on to the user form window once you've completed filling out those fields by clicking Next. We're going to change the form presented to the user when they get their task from Edit Document to Display Document because we do not want the user to make changes to the document properties when they perform this task. To do this, click the ellipses next to Edit Document and then select the form Display Document from the list. Now we're going to move on to the Participants screen where we'll select who we want to receive the task assignment. On the Participants screen, select the context browser on the right and expand the item reference group to Documents to Review and Approve, and then scroll down the list of document properties in order to drag and drop the Approvers item over into the Task Groups area on the left. The requester is going to enter a list of approvers for the task assignment, and recall we allowed multiple individuals to be selected for this task if necessary. Select the option to notify participants now when they receive a work item, and then click Next to move on to customize the email notification. On this window, select the option to customize the notification message, and then add into the subject line the following text: Document submitted for your approval with a colon. Now we want to add the title column from the context browser over on the right, so drill down into the item reference and then drag the title value over to the end of the subject line just after the colon. And one last thing we want to do on this screen is add a copy of the approved document as an attachment to this notification, which ought to be helpful to the users receiving this task assignment. To do this, click on the little down arrow next to the subject label in order to expand the email's additional properties. And then to attach the document that was submitted for approval to the email, drag and drop the document item from the context browser item references onto the attachments box as demonstrated on my screen right here. Once you've completed that task, we're going to add some context to the body of the email message by dropping the following text in after the salutation line. A document has been submitted for your approval. Please review the attached document and indicate your approval decision in one of the following ways. Upon entering that text, your email configuration settings should now look like mine on the screen. You can finish this window up when you're ready in order to move on and edit the approved outcome for this task. Next, we're going to configure the outcomes for the approval task so that all task assignees should approve the document or one assignee should reject the document. In your workflow, move the mouse over the Approved Document step and then click on the Outcomes icon as we did earlier. Now you can select the approved outcome by clicking the checkbox next to it, and then click on the Edit button, and in the Outcome Rules screen, change the drop-down menu so that all participants select the approved action, and then click OK to go back. Go ahead and edit the rejected outcome since we want to verify that it is configured so that one participant selects the rejected action. That looks good to me, so click OK when you're finished in order to go back to the design canvas. At this point, your workflow design should resemble mine on my screen. So the approved document steps outcomes are now configured as follows. If the user enters more than one approver for the document, we want all the approvers to approve the document. But if any one of the approvers rejects the document, we want the reject path to be followed immediately without waiting for any other approver's input. So at this point, let's save our status by opening up the File menu at the top of the page on the left, and then click Save to save the workflow in its current state. Now that we've added the user task to this workflow, let's move on to walk through step 4.3, where we will implement the approval path of the workflow. This includes moving the document to the Approved Document library and notifying the originator that their document has been approved and moved. The first step we want to drop on the canvas in the approved path will be the Move Document step. So select the Documents group of menu options from the ribbon menu at the top of the page, and then drag and drop the Move Document step in the first empty slot available in the approved path. When the Specify Document window appears, leave the default option to use the document referenced in the workflow, and click Next to specify the destination library. On the Specify Destination window, choose the option to browse to a library in the current site collection that's selected from the list. This may be different in your environment when you compare it to mine. You can leave the other settings at the bottom of the window alone and then click Next. To specify the library you want, select the subsite where you created your application. In my case, it will be How-To-K2, and then select the Approved Documents library and click Next to specify properties to take with the document. On the Specify Properties screen, drag and drop the title property from the context browser into the title text box, as shown on my window. This is also where we're going to include a link to the K2 ViewFlow report that gets automatically generated for a workflow as part of the K2 reporting option we enabled earlier. In the context browser on the right, expand the Workflow context group, and then drag and drop the ViewFlow property into the Approval History property as demonstrated on my window. This will allow the users to easily review the approval history of the document if they would like to see the audit trail based on participants and their decisions within the workflow. Now, you can leave the Create Document Reference checkbox checked down here at the bottom and click Finish. By leaving a check in that box, we create a reference back to that physical document in case the workflow needs to reference it from the Approved Documents library in future steps later on in the workflow. Next, hover your mouse pointer over the Move Document Workflow step and open up the Outcomes window again. From inside here, create a new outcome called Continue, and then click OK when you're done. From the ribbon menu toolbar at the top of the page, switch over to the General category listing, and then drag and drop a Send Email step into the new step that you just added to your workflow. This will provide the notification back to the workflow originator to let them know the document is approved and has been moved. So to configure the email to be sent to the workflow originator, open up the Workflow Context group from the context browser on the right, and then drag and drop the originator email property into the To text box. We're also going to set the subject line to use the title property from the Approved Documents Library Item Reference group in the context browser. Make a note here, we cannot use the reference for the Documents to Review and Approve library anymore because the previous step moved the document over to the Approved Documents library. When we told the previous step to create a new reference to the moved document, it went ahead and exposed the document in its new location in the context browser for use in this step. Go ahead and enter some meaningful text in the body of the message, such as, "Your document has been approved and moved to the Approved Documents library." You may open your document from the following link. Then you can drop the title into the body right after the word document. And for the link to the document, let's expand the Inline Functions group in the context browser on the right, and then drag and drop the hyperlink function under the text group into the email body as shown here. You'll notice a wizard screen pop up to configure the inline function. For the display name, drag and drop the title from the Approved Documents item reference. For the URL, let's drag and drop the Link To item property from the Approved Documents reference, and then click OK to complete the inline function screen. Now your email should look something like mine here on the window. When you're ready, go ahead and click OK to close out the wizard. Let's go back and look real quick at what we did in this step. We added the server steps for the approved path of the workflow, which included the approved document getting moved to the Approved Documents library, and the workflow stored a reference to the newly moved document. Then we used that newly stored reference to send an email to the requester to notify them that their document was approved and included a link to the approved document in that email message. Based on all of those steps, your workflow should look pretty similar to mine right here. In Walkthrough Task 4.4, we will add the rejected step for the workflow by basically updating the approval status property for the document. Once again, back on your design canvas, select the Documents category from the ribbon menu at the top of the page, and then drag and drop the Update Document Properties workflow step down to the remaining empty slot on your design canvas for the rejected path. In the Specify Document window that appears, you need to specify which document reference that K2 should update, since there are now 2 references available in the list. This is due to the fact that we told K2 to create a reference to the approved document after it was moved previously when we built out the approved path. Having done that, there's a reference available in this step as well, but since we really haven't moved any documents in the rejected path, we need to select a reference for documents to review and approve since it will still exist there. Go ahead and leave the rest of the default settings as is and move on to the next screen so we can specify values to change. On the Specify Values window, set the approval status value to rejected, and then finish out the wizard. Once you're back on the design canvas, feel free to change the name of this last step to Set Status Rejected by double-clicking on the name of it and then changing the text. And once you're done with that, you can go ahead and save your workflow now that it is complete. For the final walkthrough step, 4.5, we need to deploy the approved document workflow. We can easily do this by selecting the File menu from the top of the page, and then select Deploy from the list of menu options that appears. Once this kicks off, it may take a bit of time, so I'll pause the video here and we'll come back when it completes. Okay, great. Now that the workflow is deployed to the K2 environment, we can click on Close and Exit to go back to the K2 Application Elements page. Now you should be more familiar with the steps to build a workflow at this point, so we can move on to Step 5 and add the Document Review workflow. Be sure to stay on the K2 Elements page once you're redirected back there. Like we just implemented with the approval workflow, Step 5 will lead us through multiple tasks to build out the Document Review workflow. This will also contain user-related and server-related tasks to build out a basic review process. We are going to use Walkthrough Step 5.1 to create the new workflow for reviewing documents. Starting from the K2 Elements window, click the New Menu option at the top of the page, and then select Workflow. Once you see the Create Workflow screen appear, configure the new workflow properties as follows. You can name it Document Review Workflow, as this is the name of the workflow as it will appear in the K2 Worklist app part and also the report pages. Now select When the Following Events Occur radio button option, and then select Workflow is manually started, since we also want this workflow to be manually started by the requester. And that's it for this page, so you can click OK, and this will drop us into the Workflow Design tool. Now, moving on to Walkthrough Step 5.2, we will add a step to set the document's review status to Pending Review. In the Workflow Design tool, select the Documents group from the ribbon menu at the top of the page, and then drag and drop the Update Document Properties step into the blank slot in the design canvas. The Update Document Properties wizard will appear, and on the first page we need to select the document that we want to update. If you recall from the document approval workflow previously, K2 assumes we want to update the document that is associated with the workflow, which means we can leave this screen set to its default state and move on to specify the values for it. On the Specify Values screen, enter Pending Review in the Review Status text box, and then click Finish to go back to the design canvas. In the workflow design, let's double-click on the name of the new step that we just added and rename it to Set Status Pending Review. That will give it some more clarity. Great, now let's add an outcome for this task. Hover your mouse over the new step and then click on the Outcomes icon that appears on the upper right. And then once that window opens up, click on the Add button and call the new outcome Continue. And once you're done with that, you can click on the OK button to save the changes back. So the next task we need to perform in Walkthrough Step 5.3 will be to add the review document user task to the workflow. Switch over to the General category from the ribbon menu at the top of the page and drag and drop a user task for Smart Forms onto the blank slot that we just added. You can name the workflow step Review Document, then add instructions that say, "Please review the attached document and indicate your decision." This will appear on the generated user task form and is placed there to tell the user what they need to do. Next, add the following task completion actions for the participants to take: reviewed and accepted, and rework required. When you're done with that, let's move on to the user form screen to designate which K2 Smart Form to use for the task. In the user form screen, click on the ellipses button next to Edit Document, and then drill into the Display Document form from the list of forms for this application, mainly because we do not want the reviewers to change the properties of this document. You can close out this window when you're ready. Click Next to continue on to the Participants window in order to add reviewers to this task. If you recall, in the document approval workflow, we use the Approvers column for task assignments. This workflow will be using the Reviewers column for task assignments in order to review the document. So on the Participants screen, select the Context Browser tab, and then expand the item references to the Documents to Review and Approve group. Scroll down the list of values for the item reference and then drag and drop the Reviewers item into the task groups on the left. We want to send reviewers an email as well, so you can select the option to notify participants when they receive a work item, and then click Next. In the Event Notification Settings screen, select the Customize the Notification Message option and enter in the following for the subject line: Document submitted for your review. Then, to add context to the subject line, drag and drop the title value from the Documents to Review item reference in the context browser onto the subject line at the end of it. We're also going to add the document as an attachment in this email message, so you can click on the little down arrow next to the subject label in order to expand the additional properties for the message. Once you get that open, drag and drop the document item from the context browser into the attachments box. Finally, let's change the body of the email message so that the second line reads something like this: A document has been submitted for your review. Please review the attached document and indicate your review decision in one of the following ways. Once you've completed that, your email configuration screen should look something like this. If you're happy with it, go ahead and click Finish to complete the user task wizard. We also want to configure the reviewed and accepted outcome so that all reviewers assigned to a task select that action before the workflow takes that path. So hover over the workflow step and open the outcomes for the review document user task. Select and edit the reviewed and accepted outcome, and then configure the outcome so that all participants select the reviewed and accepted action, and then you can close it out when you're finished. The rework required outcome should already be configured so that one user selected the rework action. Feel free to go back and edit the rework required outcome to verify this if you'd like. When you're ready, click OK to close the outcome screen, and when you're comparing your screens, your workflow should look something like mine. Go ahead and save your workflow to prevent losing your changes. Moving on to the next walkthrough step of 5.4, we'll use this task to implement the rework path of the workflow. We'll start by updating the status of the document review to Rework Required by switching the ribbon menu at the top of the page to the Documents category. From there, drag and drop an Update Document Properties step into the blank step for the Rework Required path. We're going to use the default item reference that is already selected on the Specify Document screen, so you can go ahead and click Next. Now enter in the following into the Review Status text box: Rework Required, and then click Finish to complete the wizard. And at this point, let's rename this step to Set Status Rework. And next we need to add an outcome called Continue in order to make room for the Rework User Task Assignment step. Close that out when you're ready, and then from the ribbon menu, switch back to the General category Drag and drop a user task SmartForms version into the new step that you just added to the workflow. Configure the first screen of the wizard as follows. You can name the user task Rework Document and then add the following instruction to the users. Please rework and resubmit the document for review or cancel the review workflow. And at the bottom of this window, we want to add the following actions: resubmit for review and cancel review. This is to allow the workflow originator to edit the document, then resubmit back to the reviewer's list for review, or if they choose to cancel the workflow instance altogether, they can do that. Now let's move on to the user form screen. In the user form screen, we're going to leave the form as Edit Document because we want to allow the assignee to edit the document properties if necessary. Moving on to the participant screen, drag the default favorite option of Originator over into the Task Group section and select the option to notify participants when they receive a workflow item. In the Event Notifications screen, select to customize the notification message option. And then for the subject line, type the following: Rework required for document. Once you get that entered in from the context browser on the right, drag and drop the title value from the Documents to Review item reference into the subject line at the very end. We want the user to open the edit form to make their decision whether or not to resubmit the document for review. So you can change the body of the email so that the second line reads something like this: Your document has been returned for rework. Please use the link below to resubmit the document once you've made the necessary changes. And then in parentheses put, you may also use this form to cancel the review workflow. Then delete everything after the work list item link field. The email should now look something like this when you're done. And when you're ready, go ahead and click Finish to complete the user task wizard. In this next task, we will update the status of the document to state that it is resubmitted for review. Switch to the document category in the ribbon menu at the top of the page, and then drag and drop Update Document Properties into the empty slot in the Resubmit for Review path of the workflow. Use the default Documents to Review and Approve item reference that is already selected on the specified document screen, and then move on to set the column value. You can enter the following into the Review Status text box: Resubmitted for review, and then when you're done with that, go ahead and click Finish to complete the wizard. Now back on the design canvas, rename the new step that we just added, Set Status Resubmitted. And then on the Set Status Resubmitted step, let's add a new outcome called Continue. Then on the Workflow Step Outcome screen, select Review Document as the step to link back to. This will route the workflow back to the Review Document workflow step and assign a task back to the reviewers from the Reviewers column in the document properties. You can save that out. Now your workflow should look something like this. Notice that the line goes back to the Review Document step. For our last step in the rework path, we want to handle the cancel review action if the user decides to cancel the workflow. So drag and drop another Update Document Properties empty step into the cancel review path of the workflow. Configure the step to set the review status of the document to Review Canceled. Save it out, and on the design canvas, rename the new step to Set Status Canceled. Once you're done with that, your workflow should look something like mine. Great. Now, once again, to prevent loss of our work, use the File Save menu option to save your workflow. To quickly recap, in this step we added all the server steps and user tasks which handle the rework path of the workflow. The requester can decide whether or not they want to resubmit the document for review, and the workflow will update the document properties in SharePoint accordingly. In the next walkthrough step, 5.5, we will implement the accepted path of the workflow. From the ribbon menu at the top of the page, drag and drop an Update Document Properties step into the Workflow Reviewed and Accepted path in order to add some visual information about the status of the workflow being accepted. Leave the reference window set as is, and then configure the step on the Specify Values window to set the document's review status to Reviews Accepted. And then you can click Finish. And when you're ready on the design canvas, you can rename this new step to Set Status Accepted. And then let's move on. We also want to send a notification to the workflow originator that their document has been reviewed and accepted. So let's add a new outcome to the Set Status Accepted step, and we can name it Continue. And then the next thing we want to do is grab the Send Email step from the General category at the top of the page and drop it into the new step that we just created. Now let's configure the email to be sent to the originator of the workflow by getting originator email from the workflow context group of the context browser. We want to configure the subject line of this email message as follows. Add the following text in the subject line: Document Reviews Completed with a colon, and then drag the document title over from the context browser. Once you're done with that, enter the following text into the body of the message. The reviewers for the document have all reviewed and accepted the submitted document. You may submit the document for additional review to other users or submit the document for approval. And then drop the title field from the context browser in just after the word document. Now your workflow should look something like mine on the screen when you're done. And that's all we need to do with this workflow, so in our final walkthrough step, 5.6, we can go ahead and deploy the workflow. From the File menu at the top of the page, deploy the document review workflow. This may take a bit of time if it's your first deployment in a while, so I'll go ahead and pause the video here and then we'll come back when the deployment is complete. Okay, now that our process is deployed successfully, we can go ahead and click Close and Exit to go back to the K2 Elements page. For step 6, we're going to test the application that we just built. In this test, we will submit 2 documents for review and approval. For testing purposes, you can use your own account for the review and approval tasks, or select another user in your environment and ask them to review and approve the document. We will also test the rework loop for one document, and in the approval workflow, we will test the effect of rejecting and approving the document. Let's begin walkthrough step 6.1, in which we will upload 2 documents and start the review document workflow for both by first browsing to the Documents to Review and Approve library, and then clicking the New Document link to upload a new document. You can upload any document that you'd like. In my example, I'm going to upload Sample 1 document, and then configure the properties for this document as follows. For the name field, I'm going to leave the generated value as is because this field should be set to the file name of the document that we're uploading. For title, we can set this to Test 1 Doc Review and Approval. And then in selecting reviewers, for the sake of time, I'm just going to enter one user here. You can use your own account or another user's account in your environment if you'd like. In my case, I'll just use the administrator account to make it easier to demonstrate since that is what I'm logged in as. Now, you can leave the review status blank because the workflow will update this field. And in selecting approvers, let's again enter one user here. You can use your own account or another user's account, and I'm just going to use the administrator again. Leave approval status blank as well since the document approval workflow will update this field. And then save the document. Now upload another document and configure the properties for this second document as follows. Again, leave the name field as it is, and then for the title, call it Test 2 Doc Review and Approval. And then for reviewers, again, you can enter one user here for the sake of time and select anybody that you want from your environment. I'm going to use Cody for this one to review the document. Leave review status alone again, and then for approvers, I'm going to use Bob for this document, but feel free again to select anybody that you'd like. The approval status can also be left blank again so that the workflow can update it later on. Now save the document back to the library, and then from here you can check in both of the documents that you've uploaded so that they are available for the reviewers and approvers if they are not set to your account. With that, the documents in the library should now be ready for submission to the review workflow. Let's send the first document through the review workflow. To do this, open the context menu up for the first document that you uploaded, and from that menu, select the K2 Workflows option. From the K2 Workflows screen, our test calls for submitting this document for review first, so select the Document Review Workflow, and then click the Start button. Once the form is submitted, you will be returned to the document library, and you should see that the review status column for this document has been set to Pending Review. If it's not currently set, wait a few seconds and refresh the library until you see it. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go back to the K2 Workflows area through the Context menu and check to see how K2 displays this workflow as it's started. As you can see, the document review workflow has started for the first document based on the instances view here on the page. If you wish, open the View Flow report to verify that the workflow is waiting for the reviewer to action their task. Before we complete task 6.1, return to the document library and then select the K2 Workflows context for the second document that you've uploaded. On this page, go ahead and start the document review workflow again for this document. And when you're done, go back to the document library main page and refresh. For walkthrough step 6.2, we're going to perform the review documents task for the two documents we just began the workflows against. Make a note, if you selected another user as the reviewer for the submitted documents, that user will need to perform these steps instead. As the reviewer for the documents, open the SharePoint site landing page for your K2 application. You should see a review task for that user's K2 worklist app part. As the administrator, I'll also open the email client to review the notification that should have been sent out when the task was assigned to review the document for that account. And here we do see a notification email from the K2 server asking the user to review the document. Notice as well that the document is attached to the email messages and can be opened directly right from the email. Let's complete this task from email by replying to this message with an action of reviewed and accepted. Now, after a few seconds, we should get a confirmation from the K2 server that the task was completed. And there it is. Now let's return to the Documents to Review and Approve library and verify that the first document status is set to Reviews Accepted based on our settings from the workflow. And after a refresh, there it is. Open the K2 Workflows context menu for the first document again. In here, we should see that the document review workflow for the first document has completed since K2 keeps track of that process information for us. Heading back to the email client, if we refresh our email inbox, there should now be a notification from the K2 server that the document reviews workflow has been completed. Notice it contains the information that we configured earlier in the workflow email step. Let's again flip back to the landing page of the site to bring up the K2 Worklist app part, and then open the review document task for the second document. Note you may need to ask the selected reviewer to perform this step. In my case, I've opened up an instance of the browser as Cody. Upon opening the form, notice that the reviewer cannot change the document properties because we used the display form for this task and not the edit form. From the task form, let's go ahead and select the Rework Required action and then submit the form back. And now we can head back to the document library and verify that the second document status is set to Rework Required by refreshing the page. And that looks good here. So in review for this step, we tested the Review Document task. The first document's review is now completed, but the second document should be back with the originator because the document needed rework. In the next step, we will resubmit the document for review. In walkthrough step 6.3, we're going to resubmit the second document for review as the originator of the review workflow. Open the email client for the user who submitted the second document for review. You should see a task notification email, but notice that you can only open the task form for the email because we changed the email notification not to include the option to reply to the email to complete the task. This was mainly because if a document requires rework, we would assume that the submitter needs to actually open and rework the document rather than just replying to the email message. Click on the task link to open the task form from the email message. If you'd like, feel free to open the linked document inside this message. Make some changes and then save the document back to the SharePoint library. Be sure the document is checked in though if you do this. I'm going to go ahead and skip that for now, and on the task form, I'll just select the Resubmit for Review action and save it back. At this point, let's go back to the Documents to Review and Approve library to verify that the document review status for the second document is now set to Resubmitted for Review, since that is what we just actioned the task to do. And it looks like it's working for us from here. Now open the K2 Workflows history for the second document from the Context menu, and then select the View Flow report to verify that the document is indeed back at the Review Document task. There you can see that the Review Document task is now the active task in the graphic. Now with Walkthrough Step 6.4, I'm going to have my reviewer for the second document, which was Cody, review the document again by opening up her email client. We'll just assume the document is good now and reply to this message with the action of Reviewed and Accepted. Then we'll bounce back to the document library to check the review status column with a refresh of the page. And there we have completed the second document review, along with validating that the rework path works in our workflow. In the real world, of course, a document could be submitted and reworked multiple times, but we'll leave it here as it stands since we should be able to handle that scenario with this design. We're going to use Walkthrough Step 6.5 to submit the first document to the document approval workflow and reject the document, so let's get started. Starting from the Documents to Review and Approve library, use the Context menu to open the K2 Workflows page for the first document that you uploaded. Then go ahead and select the Document Approval workflow from the Select Workflow dropdown and click Start. This should be starting the approval workflow in the background, so now let's return to the document library and verify that the document approval status is set to pending approval with a page refresh. As a document approver, again, it may be someone other than you in your environment, open up the email client and review the document approval task and reply to the email message with the action of Rejected. And once you've completed that, let's go back into the document library and verify that the document's approval status has been set to Rejected. We may have to refresh this once or twice in order for this to appear. Then open up the Approved Documents library to verify that that document was not copied over there because it was not approved. Okay, that looks good because we want to run this again at this point. Next, open up the K2 Workflows page for the first document again. Now you should see two workflows in the Workflow History section. These are the two workflows that the document was submitted to, and if you have time, drill down into the workflows and open the View Flow report for each of the workflows to review more historical information. With the reject path of the approval workflow now tested, let's move on to Walkthrough Step 6.6 and submit the second document to the approval workflow in order to test the approved path. In the Documents to Review and Approve library, use the Context menu to open the K2 Workflows page for the second document that you uploaded. Then select the Document Approval workflow from the drop-down list again and click Start to begin this workflow. Next, return to the document library and verify that the document approval status is actually set to pending approval based on our status update settings from the workflow. You may have to refresh this page a couple of times. Now, ask the document approver in your environment that you assign this task, in my example it was Bob Maggio, to open their email client and review the document approval task. This time reply to the email with an approved action, or alternatively open the task from the K2 work list app part and select Approved in the task form to send it down that path. Once that's completed, let's return to the landing page of our SharePoint site and verify that the second document was actually moved to the Approved Documents library. I'll open up that library really quick, and there you can see the document has been copied over successfully. Now let's check the audit history of this workflow instance by clicking on the Approval History hyperlink right next to this document. This will direct us to the View Flow report where we can track the approval history for the document. Feel free to click around the View Flow report if you'd like to see more information about who approved the document. Finally, go back to your email client and open up the message from K2 that the document was approved and move to the Approved Documents library. If you'd like to, click on the hyperlink in the email message to open that document and verify that that link works as well. Now let's quickly review this step. In this step, we tested the approved path of the document approval workflow. So at this point, your K2 application is complete and ready for use. If you'd like to hang around a bit longer, you can continue with Step 7, where we're going to learn how to edit the smart forms generated by K2. In Step 7 of the document review and approval demonstration, we're going to take a look at customizing the K2 generated smart forms. It is assumed that you have completed Steps 1 through 6 and have the necessary smart form forms and views to work through this step. You may have noticed that on the Edit Document form, the user can change the values of the review status and approval status columns. While this does not affect the workflow and the workflow would overwrite the user's inputs anyway, it might be better if these columns never appear in the form to begin with. If you're not already there, browse to the K2 application for the Documents to Review and Approve library to load up the Elements page. We want to edit the Edit Document view for our application in this step. So from the K2 Application Elements page, select the Edit Document view, and then click the Edit menu option at the top to bring it up in edit mode. You should now be looking at the Design tool where we can edit the forms generated by K2. In the Layout screen, locate the Review Status text box and click on it. And at this point, you'll notice a warning message appear. You can click on Yes to check the view out. K2 forces us to check out forms and views for edits, and these edits will not be visible to our users, however, until we check the form or view back in. Go ahead and select the Review Status text box, and then press the Delete key on your keyboard to delete it from the form. Also select the Review Status label and delete it from the form. We want to repeat these steps for the Approval Status text box and its label as well. When you're done with that, your view should look like mine here on the screen. We can also remove the blank rows from the view, so to do this, select a cell in one of the blank rows and then click the Remove button here at the top of the page in the toolbar menu. Let's take a second to remove both of the blank rows where the Approval Status and Review Status text boxes were previously. Now your view should look like this. You can go ahead and click Finish to commit the changes to the view layout. Once you're back on the K2 Elements page, right-click the Edit Document view and then select Check-in to check your changes in for the view layout. This will push these changes we just made out to our users. Now let's go test this update by going back to the Documents to Review and Approve library. From the main library page, let's add a new document to this library. Notice when the window appears with the Document Properties screen, the Review Status and Approval Status columns are no longer visible. Also take notice that the Review Status and Approval Status columns are still in the SharePoint list when we go back, which means that the changes we made only affected the Edit Document view and not the physical list itself. Our changes for this step are now complete, and the document approval application is now ready for use. With this step, you should have a basic understanding of how to get in to edit layout content for SmartForms. To quickly review the build-out process of the Document Review and Approval K2 for SharePoint application, we really did cover quite a bit of information while putting all the components together for this application. We learned the basics on how to create document review and approval workflows in K2 for SharePoint. With our data sources, we looked at how to work with document libraries inside a K2 application, and to provide faster access to the document being reviewed, we learned how to attach documents to email messages inside a workflow. To facilitate good collaboration techniques, we used this example to build a rework loop into the workflow, and in the approval workflow, we had a chance to move a document to another library using a workflow step. K2 reporting made an appearance when we added a link to the view flow report for auditing purposes in the properties of the approved document. We also learned we can create several K2 workflows associated with the same document library with both the review and approval workflows. In our last step, we walked through the ability made available to edit generated forms for a K2 application, all within the context of the web browser. Finally, we also configured the workflows in this application with the ability to start manually or basically in an on-demand fashion. We would like to thank you for watching this demonstration. We hope you have a much better understanding of how you can use many of the aspects of this scenario within applications in your own environment.